Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I have the review on the GF75 Thin from MSI. I'll let you know what I like about this laptop and more importantly what I dislike about it and if I recommend it. So let's roll. All right, so I've had this laptop for the last couple weeks now. Overall, it's okay. It is definitely on the low to medium end budget wise, and it kind of shows. What I mean by that is, it's plastic chassis. They did a little bit of work to make it look like a brushed aluminum kind of plastic. You can see that on the lid and on the deck itself, but there's a couple more compromises. Screen itself, 144 hertz. It is not 100% of the sRGB, so you definitely can notice that the colors are muted. They don't pop as much. The greens aren't quite as green. Touchpad, very noisy. You can hear that. So I don't like that. Overall battery life is pretty bleak as well. Only getting a couple hours of runtime. Now, in terms of overall the specs, this does have a i7-10758, 6 cores, 12 threads, boosting up to 5 gigahertz, 16 gigs of memory. It has the start of the show, the 3060, only 75 watts though, so it really is not able to do a lot. You'll see a little bit about what I mean in some benchmarks. Keyboard is per key RGB, which is nice. Overall, I find the keycaps to be a little small, but you do get a full keyboard with numpad on the right-hand side. The other aspect that I don't like, of course, this is kind of more of a design of the 17-inch, but you don't get anything to grab onto the back, so you're really kind of two-handing it, because really you're going to need a pretty solid wrist to be able to maneuver this. While it has this nice feature where the hinge will lift up the laptop, in order for it to lift up the laptop, it has to be quite a ways backward. So if you're really on top of the laptop, you can get the advantage of having some additional space for the cooling underneath, but I find in practice, it's just never really up and off the table like the design would intend it to be. So be mindful of that. While idle, the fans are running. You can hear them. And there is some coil whine. So that's also something I do not like about this. The good thing though is that on the deck itself, because we got this extra space up here, most of the hotter components, the heat dissipates up here where your keyboard does not. And so as a result, the keys are actually fairly cool, getting into kind of the high 20 range, which is very comfortable actually. So in terms of screen bleed, I do have screen bleed on this model. It's in the lower right-hand corner. It's luck of the draw with a lower quality panel. It's kind of to be expected. So you might get something a little bit better. So I wish you luck. The keyboard itself, what I don't like is that the Windows key is actually on the right-hand side. I really prefer Windows key on the left-hand side. I'm just used to that. I'm sure you can get used to it over time. Again, it's just more of a way the keyboard is laid out. So in terms of speakers, the speakers are pretty blah. Take a listen. So I find that the audio itself is very bright. In fact, there's really no bass at all. Not that you'd expect much from a laptop, and the mids are pretty muted. Like all I get is a lot of treble. So you're definitely gonna want some headphones, but it'll get you by if you're just starting out. The fans I find are just a little too worry. I find that they have a higher pitch whine than most of the laptops I've tested, so it's definitely not easy on the ears. All right, so next up, let's get to the benchmarks. All right, so first up, superposition. So of course this has a 3060, 75 watt, comes in at 4K optimized at 5720. So rated in around par for the 2070 Super Series, and then on 1080p Extreme, 4299, just slightly lower behind the 2070 Supers. So heading over to 3D Mark, this is where you can see that the 3060 75 watts, it's right around that 2070 Super 80 watt, like the MSI GF76 Stealth. So it's basically just back and forth in terms of performance across Fire Strike Extreme, Time Spy, and Port Royal. So Call of Duty Modern Warfare 1080p, all max settings. This came in at just around 55 frames per second. So you may want to adjust your settings just to get a little bit more frames per second to get the best possible gaming experience. So Shadow Tomb Raider 1080p, highest settings. This had DLSS enabled. Cooler boost came at 74 frames per second, and on balance mode at 72 frames per second. Taking a look at the noise levels. So when you can compare this, this came in around 60 decibels on extreme. The balance came in around that 50 decibels. You can see that the temps though, so CPU wise on both hitting 95 Celsius. So it didn't make a difference. This thing, I don't know why, but this is always cranked right up to the max that CPU can handle. GPU wise, 71 under balance, 75 on GPU. Really what I find here is that this definitely needs an undervolt, and even then it's running hot all the time. So really kind of disappointed to see that. Now moving over to Death Stranding on extreme cooler boost, 80 frames per second. Heading over to Forza Horizon 4, 100 frames per second. Flight Simulator, all ultra settings, 1080p, 35 frames per second. Red Dead Redemption 2, all ultra settings, on balance 43 frames per second, and on extreme cooler boost 47 frames per second. Now taking a look at the CPU and GPU temps, these were a little bit better. On the extreme cooler boost, we saw temps come in at 62 and 63 for CPU and GPU. Again, 60 decibels, which is quite loud. And one thing to note that the fans, they have a higher pitched whine to them, which is definitely not easy on the ears. So I definitely recommend gaming at the balance mode if you can. Balance mode came in at 48 decibels, and CPU and GPU temps 80 on the CPU, GPU 78. So Fortnite Epic settings, DLSS on, 112 frames per second, just Epic, no fanciness, 95 frames per second. Moving over to Apex Legends, this came in at 127 frames per second. Now just hitting a number of various titles, all highest settings, 1080p. So Watchdog Legion around 54-55 on either balanced or extreme cooler boost. Moving over to Horizon Zero Dawn, around 62-63 frames per second. Division 2, again 76 frames per second. Far Cry, around 64 to 69 frames per second. Valhalla at 56 frames per second, and Odyssey coming in at 49-51 frames per second. Overall, you can see that there's not much of a difference between extreme cooler boost and balance mode, but you really are trading off temperatures. Overall, when I look at the benchmarks, I'm actually a little disappointed. So here's why. One, I think the challenge here is that this is only 75 watts. And as such, a 75 watt is really around par for a 2070 Super at around that 70 to 80 watt range. Now here's the problem. Most laptops from last gen are getting blown out at much better pricing. And so as a result, you could probably get a 2070 Super with a higher TDP, probably 100 watts, maybe 120 watts, and those laptops will perform better than this overall. So something to keep in mind if you're considering this. I wouldn't recommend it just simply because the value for the money is not there. Overall, the CPU temps are just way too high for my liking, so that's a big strike against it. The value for the money compared to some of the other laptops on the marketplace right now, I don't like it. The things that I do like about it are few and far between, and so as a result, I really have to say this is a 5 out of 10 for me for my IMO score. That being said, if you can get a good deal on it, hey, it might be worth it for you. But I hope this video was informative and it helps you in your buying decision. Well, that wraps up the GF75 Thin. Hope that helps on your buying decision if you're considering this laptop. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, bye for now.